confident are you that your loved ones are safe in nursing homes? A recent state lawsuit against Golden Living Centers is raising questions about patient care in Pennsylvania.
Our Amanda St. Hilaire began investigating the issue and found a lot of other nursing homes in our area with violations. Amanda joins us live. Amanda, what are you uncovering tonight?
Well, James, Val, the details you're about to hear are disturbing, to say the least. Every nursing home that we looked at had violations, and the people we talked to today say this is an issue that affects everyone in the mid-state.
My mother became ill in the hospital after a fall.
Tamara says she wasn't impressed with local options for nursing homes. She settled on Golden Living, but later felt that was a mistake.
They'd sit all day in their urine, in their waste, because nobody checked with them.
We've told you how the Attorney General's filed charges against Golden Living nursing homes in Pennsylvania, but we wanted to look at other facilities too. So we went through all the Department of Health inspections for Dauphin and York County nursing homes. The results weren't pretty. For example, inspections for Spring Creek Rehab and Healthcare Center in the Harrisburg area say the facility gave patients unnecessary medications and had bedsides covered with dry debris and feces. Some of the other violations were flagged as serious harm situations. At Pleasant Acres Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in York, an inspection from May 2014 shows the nursing home did not have a CPR policy or staffing with CPR certification. The facility also posted a notice saying its staff would not do CPR even if the patient had requested it. We asked the Department of Health if patients and their families are notified about these kinds of violations. The department says no. Inspection reports are posted to its website, but you can't see those until more than 1 month after the actual inspection. In the meantime, people like Tamara are hoping for change. Her mother died in January, and now Tamara says she's worried about what will happen one day to her and her other loved ones.
We'll be sitting in our own feces, and we will be treated as non-humans. We've worked too hard to have a good life to end with such disrespect and to lose our dignity through the treatment and care that is provided in the nursing homes.
Pleasant Acres sent us this statement about its violations, saying, quote, "The nursing home inspection of May 2014 caught us in the final stages of implementing our CPR policy facility-wide." The administrator went on to say the process was so advanced that it only took a few hours to fix the violations. We also reached out to Spring Creek, but haven't heard back yet. And all the inspections we just told you about say the violations have since been corrected. But if you'd like to look up a nursing home in your area, we have details about how you can do that at 6. Working for you, Amanda St. Hilaire, ABC 27 News.
Now to an ABC 27 News investigation, this involving former Harrisburg Mayor Stephen Reed, charged with misusing public funds. We investigated the city's finances during his tenure. Tax dollars spent on antiques, expensive meals, and alcohol. We found a lot and found a lot missing. Amanda St. Hilaire dug through the paperwork.
The city says a lot has changed, so your tax dollars are now used more responsibly. What we found in these credit card statements from the past is helping us understand Harrisburg's current challenges.
We filed a right-to-know request for Harrisburg's credit card statements from 2000 till now. After several weeks of searching, the city said it couldn't find statements from 2000 through 2004. So we worked with what we had, mapping out expenses starting in 2005. Right away, we found a charge of more than $7,000 at an antiques mall in Virginia. Earlier this year, the Attorney General's office served a warrant at former Mayor Stephen Reed's house carrying out antiques, saying he purchased them with city money for his own use.
Amassed under Reed's watch was roughly 10,000 items.
There was no way for us to tell if the antiques charge we found was for personal use, Harrisburg Civil War Museum, or even something else, because there were no receipts. In fact, none of the credit card charges from 2005 and 2006 had any receipts at all. We called Reed's attorney. A spokesperson told us he'd get back to us if Reed had a response. He never did. As we dug through the paperwork, we found restaurant charges well over $100, limo service rentals, even a $59 room service charge at the Harrisburg Hilton. When we told taxpayers where their money went, they weren't pleased.
I mean, do you put money in your bank for other people to use? Do you? I don't either. That's how I feel about it.
I think that should be on coming out of their pocket instead of taxpayers paying for it.
It's not just Harrisburg. The city credit card expenses went all over the country. Conferences, hotel rooms, sometimes resorts in San Antonio, Seattle, New Orleans, and California. Flights to Nashville, Atlanta, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and Arizona. Fuel expenses and truck rentals in Virginia, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. Plus hotels closer to home, like D.C., Pittsburgh, even back here in Lancaster and Harrisburg. When you add all that up, the city of Harrisburg spent more than $50,000 on travel between 2005 and 2010. All this while vendors weren't getting paid and the city was sliding further into debt.
To me, it's not fair. That money can be put to better use, I think.
There's more. December 2008, just before New Year's Eve, there's a $441 charge at a wine and spirits store. Peach schnapps, champagne, Jägermeister, and more, all tax exempt.
I would be hard pressed to think where that would be an appropriate purchase.
Harrisburg's finance director, Bruce Weber, wasn't working for the city when all this happened.
No one in the current finance department has been here longer than about 3 years.
That meant starting from scratch.
I think we're in growing pains now. Before it was birthing pains, and they're always a lot worse.
Part of those pains included the elimination of the city credit card in 2010. We found a notice terminating Harrisburg's credit privileges with FedEx, but couldn't find the documentation about why the card itself got the axe. Neither could the current finance department.
We just looked at it from a fresh perspective.
Hillary Green is Harrisburg's purchasing manager. She helped the city secure a credit card this year after 5 years without. She says many purchases nowadays require some kind of card. She also says now there's a lot more control.
We're not telling people that they can use their credit card just for convenience purposes and for immediate purposes, but that they still have to plan out in advance in moving through that request process.
The new credit card limit is only $2,500. Employees are not allowed to take the card on trips, and only 2 people can approve purchases. Even then, receipts are a must.
You have to be accountable, literally. Prove it.
We look through the current administration's expense reports. There's a lot less travel, a lot more documentation, and no sight of alcohol, room service, or antiques. Working for you, Amanda St. Hilaire, ABC 27 News.
And now that the city of Harrisburg does have a credit card, Amanda will be checking those statements as well, keeping track of your tax dollars.
Public leaders using private emails to do public business. It got Hillary Clinton into a lot of trouble. Well, now we're learning that it's also happening right here in the mid-state. Amanda St. Hilaire investigates. Amanda.
Flora, we started looking into this when we got the results of a right-to-know request, and those results are right here, this lovely stack of emails. I do want to say right off the bat, there's nothing illegal about what we're going to show you, but it does raise some ethical questions that could affect transparency and your ability to get information.
We recently got the results of a right-to-know request for Lower Paxton Township Supervisor's emails. As we went through the documents, we noticed there were no emails sent from the supervisors at lowerpaxtonpa.gov address. We thought that was kind of odd. So we looked at the township manager's emails. Those are public records too.
So you can see here, this one is from Supervisor Robin Lindsay's Comcast email, and this one is from Supervisor Bill Horning's Hotmail. So why are elected leaders who have a township email address using their private emails to conduct public business? That question has gotten national attention since Hillary Clinton admitted to using her Gmail for public business while she was Secretary of State.
If government officials were permitted to get around the right-to-know law simply by using Gmail or Yahoo or something like that, it would blow a hole a mile wide in the right-to-know law.
Open Records Executive Director Eric Arneson says the way state law is written, even emails from private addresses can be considered public record. But using private emails does make it harder to have accountability and transparency.
It is definitely a best practice for agency business to be done on agency equipment.
That's because if the email is on the agency server, the right-to-know officer has direct access.
It takes a lot more to track down personal emails, and that means a bigger chance information could slip through the cracks.
You don't have the direct ability to physically do it yourself. You have to rely on the individual that you're asking.
That brings us to our original question. Why use private email in the first place?
There are, I think, some people who do it just not even thinking and with no malicious intent whatsoever. But I do think there are people who do it purposely as an attempt to circumvent public records laws.
Back to Lower Paxton. We called the township manager. He says there's no specific reason the supervisors use their personal emails. He did say they don't use email very often. But this isn't just about Lower Paxton. Susquehanna Township commissioners also use personal emails, but the new township manager points out they're out in the open as the primary form of communication. Steelton's website also lists personal emails for council members, although the new manager says they're transitioning to borough email addresses in an effort to promote transparency.
The Office of Open Records hopes it can do more training this year to encourage leaders to skip the private email altogether. But the executive director also says there are some municipalities that need to rely on personal emails. We'll show you why at 6. Working for you, Amanda St. Hilaire, ABC 27 News.
Now, does your employer let you accumulate unused sick and vacation days for years and years and then write you a big fat check when you decide to leave? Didn't think so.
But a little digging by ABC 27 found that the state is a pretty generous employer when it comes to departing workers. And while it looks for every penny to cobble together a budget, millions and millions of dollars are literally walking out the door. Page after page, payout after payout. An ABC 27 right to know request found that in the past 2 years alone, the House and Senate have doled out well over $3 million each in unused sick and unused vacation pay to departing employees. 20 walked out the door with more than 30 grand, 11 got more than 40,000, and 9 top 50 grand. A dozen got $60,000 or more. Watchdogs are barking.
You shouldn't be able to use sick days as a financial investment vehicle. It shouldn't be a golden parachute. You know, we've reached the point of no return.
But the payouts are policy and legal, and there's bipartisan participation. Randy Albright left the Senate Democrats to become Governor Wolf's budget secretary. He said he used just 2 sick days in 29 years, and though he hasn't technically left the building, Albright was rewarded with more than $115,000 in unused sick and vacation when he left the Senate.
I do think it's important to, sit here and speak to you directly. I'm not going to hide from what the facts are and the compensation that I did receive.
Albright wouldn't talk about the appropriateness of the payout policy, but the guy whose job it is to balance the state's books insists that if you want good employees, you have to offer them a good deal.
The compensation levels need to be appropriate to attract that caliber staff.
The Senate's former chief clerk, Russ Faber, got a going away of more than $104,000. The chair of the PUC, Gladys Brown, left Senate Democrats with nearly $79,000. And Christian Callahan, chief of staff to House Majority Leader Mike Turzai, left for a lobbying job with 62 grand in unused sick and vacation. The fiscal watchdogs are also barking.
I think this is why people that aren't in government, or at least in politics, get frustrated with the system because...
Eugene DePasquale is a former lawmaker and the state's auditor general.
Clearly there's no cap on it, there's no control on it, and very few of any people in the private sector have anything remotely close to that. And so when you're especially dealing with these tough budget times that the state is facing, reforms have to be put in place to tackle this.
Policy here needs to change too. Current lawmakers also want reforms.
It rattles my chain quite a bit. Obviously, that's something, now that this has been brought to light, something we got to look into.
The Senate bosses don't just look at the legislature. The problem is Commonwealth-wide.
Well, let me tell you, Dennis, there's some egregious things going on even outside of that.
Indeed, a longtime worker under the governor's jurisdiction recently boasted on Facebook about accumulating sick days years ago when he made $10 an hour and cashing them out at his current $55 an hour. Again, it's policy. And what exactly is the incentive for the policy protectors to change it before it's their turn to cash out?
At the Capitol, the most important term is OPM, other people's money. And when you're spending other people's money, you tend to be much more generous than you would if it were your own money.
And again, we should point out, these are not pensions we're talking about. These are unused sick and vacation. They get pensions on top of that. We should also note that in 2010, much to the chagrin of many employees I've talked to, House Democrats did put caps on how many sick and vacation days their workers could accrue and then cash out.
The state is once again investigating potential wrongdoing by the borough of Steelton.
This time it's about codes enforcement. It seems the chief of police and borough manager have been signing off on building permits, which they're not permitted to do. ABC 27 investigates.
An office building is going up in Steelton. So is this tower on the Steel High football field. Construction projects that require approvals from a codes enforcement officer, which Steelton hasn't had from April until just this week. ABC 27 has obtained permits signed by John King, identified as code enforcement officer. It's the same John King who is the chief of police. Borough manager Sarah Galatly has also signed off on building projects, according to sources. And according to the state's website, neither King nor Galatly are certified to act as codes officers. The Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry is now investigating Steelton and would not comment. King refused to go on camera, but did say he and Galatly, quote, did oversee the codes office. Galatly was not in the office and didn't return phone calls seeking comment. Mayor Tom Acri wouldn't go on camera either, but did confirm that the pair did sign off on, quote, smaller projects that didn't require electric or plumbing work. We asked a mid-state police chief about King's apparent impersonating of a codes officer. He requested anonymity, but did say, quote, I think this is a huge liability there. We as police chiefs are not educated or qualified to make those types of decisions, end quote. It's the latest in a string of bureaucratic blunders in Steelton. In recent months, the state's investigated the borough for falsifying water quality records, overbilling customers, and failing to properly respond to right-to-know requests.
And I stopped in the borough office this afternoon, asked to see recent permits and who signed off on them. The secretary in the codes office pointed me down the hall to the borough manager's office. The secretary in the borough manager's office pointed me back to the codes office, and so it goes in Steelton. We'll keep digging and keep you posted. Again, the state is investigating, and Steelton does now have a new codes officer. Despite having an open records law, one Pennsylvania borough is not being very open with ABC 27, and a legal fight could be costly to taxpayers. Amanda St. Hilaire seeking accountability tonight. She's live in Steelton. Amanda?
Dennis, the right to know law exists so we can make sure government agencies are doing what they're supposed to do. That's why several months ago we submitted right to know requests so we could get public records from the borough of Steelton about its water quality and billing. Attorneys tell me the borough violated the law right off the bat by not having any right to know contacts or information on its website. Then the borough manager, Sarah Galatly, ignored our requests. We appealed to the Office of Open Records and won, and that gave Steelton 30 days to turn over the records. Now those 30 days are up and we still don't have the information, despite several phone calls and visits to the borough office. We eventually caught up with the borough manager and she told us we'd have to talk to the solicitor. Well, he said he's never received any information about this right to know request from the borough manager, who is the right to know officer. If we take this to court, a judge can force the borough to turn over the records, along with thousands of dollars in fines. And that's tax money that the borough wouldn't have to spend if it had followed the law.
A lot of agencies still don't understand what the law requires or what they have to do. And then there's some arrogance and not wanting to turn records over mixed in there.
We're not the only ones who've had problems getting information from the borough of Steelton. In fact, we just ran into someone walking down the street who says he's had several requests that were ignored as well, and documents from the Office of Open Records show 17 appeals have been filed against the borough of Steelton just in the last 7 months because of ignored right-to-know requests. Working for you live in Dauphin County, Amanda St. Hilaire, ABC 27 News.
Soaring tuition forces many to choose state schools. They are supposed to be more affordable.
But as you write bigger checks, some are actually getting bigger paychecks. Amanda St. Hilaire investigating starting with a right to know request. Amanda.
Flora, Val, you can see here that request produced a lot of paper. We went through it all, but first I want to clarify. When we say state schools, we're not talking about Penn State or Temple. They get some state money, but they operate independently. So the schools you see here, like Bloomsburg, Westchester, Shippensburg, or IUP, they're part of the state system of higher education, and they're actually owned by the Commonwealth. Those payroll numbers came as a surprise to several families dealing with tuition increases.
So I kept telling my husband from, I think when Justin was little, we need to start putting money away for college. He's applied for...
So Elena and her husband put away what they could for their son's future at Indiana University of Pennsylvania.
Looking back, if we didn't have that much money saved up, our son probably would have had to have come home from college.
To keep her son wearing the IUP crimson,
I think
Elena's gone in the red.
It's still not a fun bill to get.
Especially now. State system records show in 2004, the average cost of attendance at IUP was $10,489. Now it's almost doubled to $20,816.
We're caught. We don't really have a choice. We pay it, and we don't ask questions because it's something that we want our children to have.
Now we're getting answers. Why has the cost of public higher education skyrocketed? Pennsylvania state schools point to funding cuts.
So that makes it increasingly difficult as our costs go up. Our only other source of revenue is really tuition.
With all this talk of funding, we wanted to see how state schools are spending the money they do have. So we went through hundreds of pages of payroll documents over the last 10 years. We looked at the salaries of non-union employees. So presidents, deans, assistants, information technology staff, just to name a few. In 2004, the total payroll for non-union employees was more than $93 million. In 2014, it was up nearly 42% to $132 million.
Why that kind of increase? Because that's more than inflation.
Overall, if you look at the average salary paid to a non-represented employee 10 years ago to today, though that increase actually pretty much tracks inflation.
Economists say the inflation rate has averaged 2.13% per year. But last year, when tuition and fees went up, the president of Bloomsburg got a 10% raise. He now makes more than $248,000 per year. Westchester's president received a 13% raise. He now makes more than $273,000 per year.
That number can be tough for a parent to swallow if they've just written out a check for an increased tuition.
Right. There were two components to those raises.
A merit increase and a market adjustment.
Our university presidents generally are paid below the national average.
Why are those adjustments being made now, especially with a lack of state funding and with enrollment numbers taking a dip?
It was a commitment the board made several years ago. This is a phased-in process, and again, I think it's the board just believes that it is important, again, to do what we can to make sure that we have the very strongest leadership.
So there's always a balance in any employment situation with trying to get the best employees versus trying to, especially when you're a public entity, doing it something that's affordable.
Auditor General Eugene DePasquale's recent state system audit shows the schools are doing well, but he says they could do more to keep tuition down. So we told him what we found. For example, the assistant to the president of Clarion University got a 50% jump in pay over the last 10 years. She now makes 6 figures. Then there's Bloomsburg, which has a president, an executive assistant to the president, an executive secretary, and a deputy to the president. The Auditor General says there is such a thing as a luxury position.
You got to really take even a second glance at whether it's a critical position on furthering education today. And sometimes there's a situation where you just see that position just isn't necessary anymore.
But there's more. In 2004, 16% of non-union employees made 6 figures. In 2014, 30% made 6 figures.
That's a lot of employees making 6 figures.
Yes, it is, but again, if you look at the average numbers, our average salary has increased at about the rate of inflation.
In the private sector, retiring employees often make up for the ones who get raises.
That's not really happening as often here, so is that something that's sustainable?
I guess on the one hand, I think it shows the system's a good place to work. You know, if you don't have a lot of turnover, that is going to affect your payroll over time.
There is a long-term sustainability issue.
Parents like Alana say it's time for solutions.
There needs to be some type of a cap that's put on the salaries.
But the state system goes back to funding as its biggest challenge, not salaries. Reports show the schools have lower tuition increases than the national average, even with all Pennsylvania's funding cuts.
We would agree completely with the Auditor General when he says we need to do more. We do need to do more. We would also, I think, agree with the Auditor General when he said that the state needs to do more.
But these state universities are there so that everyday Pennsylvanians, that those kids that have the grades, they can go there and not be saddled with lifelong debt. And that is basically being threatened now with the lack of enough state investment.
But on that same note, the Auditor General says if state schools get more funding, they need to hold the line on tuition, and they also need to be transparent. And I will say, Flora and Val, so far they have been transparent with us. This is the fastest response I've ever gotten to know to a right-to-know request. We had all these documents the next day.
And there's even more to this.
There is. So tonight at 11, we have a closer look at how specifically room and board prices are also soaring, even more so than tuition. And we had some very candid conversations about this, and the reasons behind the cost, I think, will surprise a lot of people.
And that's tonight at 11.
That's tonight at 11.
All right, thank you.
New details about a controversial construction project in Lower Paxton Township.
An ABC 27 investigation reveals the township actually moved the project closer to neighbors, and they are not happy. Now, part of this project involves a new district justice office on residential land.
Friday, we broke the news of a state investigation if the township followed the right procedures. Amanda St. Hilaire live tonight with the new details. Amanda.
Val, Flora, neighbors say this project being so close to where they live has them worried about their property values and their privacy. So imagine their surprise when we found out the project didn't have to be so close. It was actually supposed to be farther away, but then the township moved it. Drive down Locust Lane and you'll be greeted by these yellow signs protesting the district justice office construction. Take a look from up here and you'll see why. It's pushing up against the neighborhoods.
Right now, it's going to come within 3 feet of the property line. That's what caused all those trees to have to be removed.
We've been digging through the paperwork on this project for a while. Meeting minutes, site plans, the appraisal, the agreement of sale. It wasn't adding up.
I just feel like something's being hidden. Something just isn't right. And that's frustrating.
So neighbors went to the township.
Do we know what they're zoned? You don't know. Well, we would appreciate if you could let us know that.
We thought it was kind of odd no one had an answer to that question.
If you do your due diligence and you do all the procedures according to what you're supposed to do, I would have thought that that would have been obvious what that land was zoned.
Neighbors had a hard time getting answers, so we took a closer look. Check out this zoning map. The appraisal shows this is where Dauphin County IDA originally wanted to put the district justice office, land zoned institutional. But the project ended up being moved over here to land zoned residential, practically in neighbors' backyards. An email from a Dauphin County spokesperson says this change was, quote, at the suggestion of Lower Paxton Township.
It's very upsetting. To me, it's just another example of how the township didn't have any consideration for the residents of this neighborhood.
Neighbors say the original location would have allowed them to keep their privacy and might have saved their property values from falling.
Had they let the DJ office on the land where the county wanted it, and they would have involved the residents right from the start, maybe we could have worked something out and we would have avoided this whole ordeal.
By the way, the sales agreement between the township and Dauphin County IDA says the land for the district justice office is zoned institutional. Well, that's not true. The construction's happening right over here on residential land. So does that make the contract void? We called the township manager. He didn't call us back. We're also waiting for him to return our calls from Friday about the state investigation into whether this project even has the right permits. Working for you live in Dauphin County, Amanda St. Hilaire, ABC 27 News.